Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, and my guest for the evening, returning recent guest, the Draft Analyst, Steve Kournianos. Steve, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
What's up, Yariv? How you doing today?
Doing well, man. I was just telling you off camera that I was listening to your recent episode on the Philadelphia Flyers. So if those who are not aware, the Draft Analyst is a website, a blog, let's say more of a website of rankings. You do it every year. You've been doing it since 2015, I believe. And it's just an awesome resource for rankings. Like, obviously there's elite prospects and whatnot. But this is just a great resource. This guy's legit. So he actually watches, he's obsessed. It's authentic. It's real. And to go alongside that, he has an awesome podcast as well, where you're doing each one of the teams and doing like kind of a season review and kind of current state, and then like a prospect and draft preview. Definitely make sure to check that out. But that's been awesome so far. I loved the Flyers one. I almost done it, but it was very good from what I heard so far.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, the reason why I do it is just so I don't want to do like a mock draft or discuss a team without at least getting a general idea of what, like context. It's just about adding context. So if I'm going to talk about the Flyers and their drafting and doing a mock draft, it's all, even when I started doing my first mock draft, like 7-8 years ago, I would always try to find out their trends, and I'm not just going to throw a name at a wall, throw a dart at like a name on the wall, and that's it. So in doing that, I'm like, wait a minute, oh my God, that team was terrible in the power play this year. Oh my God, they finished last in the power play 4 straight years. Well, maybe it's time to address that at the draft, and that's why I kind of grew into the podcast. And it's a lot of fun for me because I feel like I could talk to any fan, no matter what team they root for. I could talk to them. I can't empathize because I'm not a fan of that team, but I could definitely sympathize because, we've all suffered as hockey fans one way or another, whether it be with the salary cap or with drafting or with regular season play. So it's just a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. And it definitely comes out like listening to it. Like I feel like when you're like, it feels very authentic when you're talking about the team. Like, I know you're not like a legit Flyers fan, but you do try to empathize. Like even something you said, which I thought was really interesting, because I just like connect dots just listening to some of the stuff you say, where you're like, well, the Flyers are loaded at wing at the prospect level. And if you think back to the previous draft, right, the Flyers passed up on Cole Caulfield, right? And if you think about what you said, yeah, Cole Caulfield is awesome. I'm not saying that they definitely should have passed him. I love Cam York. But, you look at that and you look at the fact that you can speak to the fact they're loaded at wing and prospects. That's why a team makes a decision like that. They go, okay, well, we have this guy Caulfield, but we also have Cam York. They're both probably pretty equal to them in their eyes. And they go, well, we're not loaded at D, you know? So like, and little details.
Bobby Brink, a right wing, right shot, like
exactly.
And at the time, the separation between the two wasn't that great because there was concern over Caulfield's size, and it always makes sense one way or another. We as fans don't really see it at the time because they might take someone that we liked, or they might not take someone that we liked, or vice versa. But it's definitely I try to really understand where the fans are coming from, because the fans are always going to disagree. Fans are rarely in agreement of, there's one side likes the coach, the other side doesn't. One side likes the GM, the other side doesn't. So I always try to kind of like look at it from both ways.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that and totally agreed. My thing is usually I just try to tell people, like, literally I do a podcast with Chris Mayer, a writer for our site, and also he has his own thing as well. But, we have a live podcast we do called Don't Panic. And literally the reason I have it is because, there's so much panic, from pick this guy to freaking out to thinking it's the end of the world every time, where, a lot of these drafts, it takes time, first of all, for you to really know if you succeeded in a draft or not. And if you hit 50% of your draft picks, I would say it's a humongous success from what I've noticed. Like, so typically if you expect that you got 1 or 2 guys in the draft that are legit NHL players, I mean, it's a win. So that's how I kind of see it. So if you walk away with York and Brink,
some teams, if you look at how poorly some teams have drafted, they'll take 1 NHL guy per draft. I mean, I think that's how a lot of them view it, depending on how many picks they have.
Yeah, and I looked at, I've actually gone Hockey DB, and I like to kind of look at the previous draft years. And if you look prior to Hextall, And I don't really knock Holmgren for this because he traded most of his picks away. But really, they were just full of misses. Like they would not hit on those drafts. They would hit the first rounder, and that was pretty much it. Now the Flyers are kind of finding guys in, the middle, like finding a guy like Lindblom in there. And obviously we know Zayd Wisdom had an awesome performance this past year. It's like these guys are getting found like later in the draft. We have Tanner Lazinski, who's making an NHL debut. Like that was more rare back in the day. So like, I just appreciate the fact that we're landing and drafting pro guys personally.
Yeah. The cap has a lot to do with that. And I definitely think it's probably like a multifold approach that teams have with player development and roster construction is that, they know that they can only have 2 or 3 players max with like really big time deals, right? Long-term deals. And so how are we going to build around it? And I think they've come to the conclusion that a young kid on an ELC, give or take, outside of the experience and the grit and the leadership in the locker room and whatever you want to call it, can be as effective on the ice as a 34-year-old veteran forward. All right. And we're seeing that, like, you're seeing less of those grizzled graybeard types getting traded for and signed to big deals. And these young kids, and so the kids nowadays, I think they think they know. Their agents tell them, their parents tell them, they read, social media, they read all the blogs or the websites. They know that their chances are legitimate, that there's little internal competitions within the competition where it's no longer a question of, am I going to make the NHL? It's a question of, am I going to be a star in the NHL? Because we've seen it. We've seen these guys. Look at all the top scorers in the league and all the big names. There's a lot of young guys, a lot of youth in there. And I think a lot of these kids realize that their chances are greater now, whereas in the past it was like, we're not going to use you for our cup run. We're going to go out and get 2 35-year-olds who used to play for, that 2-time cup champion 8 years ago. Yep. So you're going to stay with us. You'll wear civilian clothes or be in the press box, and that's it. Yep. So it's a lot. That's why I think it's very important. And of course, the cap having a big part to do with that as well.
Yeah, but it is good to see. One thing that's always haunted me in the past is I was a big Justin Williams fan when the Flyers drafted him.
Yeah.
And I love Sammy Kapanen. But, I remember it really hurt me when we traded him. And they're like, oh, we want the veteran guy rather than young guy. But then you look at Justin Williams' career and how many cups did he win? It's like, you think about stuff like that of like some of these young kids, they really have an element that make them winners. Like Mike Richards was like that too. I mean, obviously he didn't work out here, but he was a winner. He just was a winner, like every level he was at.
Yeah, absolutely. That's his reputation.
Yeah. So not always an experience thing. So one thing I do want to start off with, and I want to predicate, I guess, the podcast this. You said something during the Flyers episode that I really liked, that you were talking about the rankings and how if you have a guy ranked at 100 or whatever, and he gets taken in the top 30, you're like, that's a great pick. And people are like, what do you mean? He was picked 2 rounds early, but you're like, but I really like him. Look at the scouting report. Can you expand on that a little bit about what you were trying to say there? Because I really liked it.
It's real simple. I'll kick up. I'll plop in my chair on my couch. I'll kick my feet up and I'll put on a game to watch a kid. And on the first shift, he'll blow me away. And I'll be like, oh my God. And I'll look around. I'm like, oh wait, there's no one here. I'll have my daughter and she's 8. And I'm like, oh my God, Adriana, did you see that? And she's like, no, I didn't see that. What are you talking about? and so from that point forward, then it becomes, and it could be the opposite too. I'm like, oh, oof, what was that? On his first shift. And so from that point forward, that's why I start building this I guess, database on this kid. And I start to pay attention to it. And what I've learned is that just like fantasy football, it's the same premise. Whereas you are, let's say, an Eagles fan, you hate the Giants. Well, guess what? If Eli Manning is your quarterback or David Jones and you're in the championship and Jones just started, you are rooting for the Giants. Okay, that's how it works. You want Jones to have a great game. You might say, well, I found myself torn rooting for, let's say, Tom Brady. And I hate Tom Brady. I hate the Patriots, but I found myself rooting for them. So it's the same thing with the draft. Whereas I'm not a Russian hockey fan. I'm an American. I like American hockey, but I found myself rooting for these Russian kids in games against America because I like them. So it's the same thing where, I can't rank everybody in the top 30, right? I can't rank everybody 15th overall. And little by little, I think people are starting to realize that you could rank a kid late. And if they, and the fans have every right to ask the question, but if you like this kid so much, why'd you rank him 150? And I just try to explain to them, like my ranking system is really it's like picture like a dry erase board with a whole bunch of little like variables, almost like a spider chart where you have like, roll on team, puck handling, hockey sense, draft status in his junior league and in national competitions. And so then it becomes like little internal battles like between players. And sometimes, like they say, for lack of a better term, nuts get cut. Like you have to tell someone, like the last guy that gets cut for the World Junior team, or the last guy that gets cut to make the Phillies out of spring training. You have to tell them like, hey, I know you hit 335 and you led us in home runs, but we just got no room for you. Like we're going a different direction, but you'll be there. It's the same thing when ranking kids, where you say, hey, I got to rank you 100, but I'm going to keep my eye on you. And I wouldn't be surprised if you, when time comes for you to strut your stuff, I could go back and say, hey, look, I told you, he was a good player. And there's always kids like that every year. So I can't stress it enough. There are kids I have ranked in the 300s and 200s that I really root for, and I'm happy for them. And I'm not ranking them that low because they suck. Right. I'm ranking them that low because I have no room to put them anywhere else.
And also it's important to remember that even the entire 7 rounds, these are still the best players at the junior level, right? Sure. They're still all, like, even 7th round players. They're not just throwaways. They're the guys who got picked by the pros early.
Yeah.
And I think, you see examples like Braden Point. Actually, I was just listening to Detroit's like pre-show the other day, and they were talking about how Steve Yzerman literally said to his scouts, they said, if you do not take Braden Point, you're fired. He like literally said that to them. So at a certain point, it's like he saw it and he's like, you got to take this guy, but he still dropped to the 3rd round, right? It's like he dropped significantly. And then a guy like Shane Gostisbehere, typically these guys, they have like one thing about their game that like, you're like, oh man, like if you're just a little bit bigger or you're a little faster, you have a better skating or you have a better shot, then you'd move up. And like Shane Gostisbehere, I think he was drafted at 5'9", and he was like 160 pounds. And then over college, he added like 20 pounds of muscle and he gained 2 inches. And all of a sudden now he's like a star college player. So it's like you're drafting kids a lot of times, right? Yeah. So so do you find yourself doing that a lot of time where you're like, you have a guy lower down and you're like, man, I really want to see how this kid grows up, like that type of feeling?
Yeah, I think my big thing is I've graduated from skating. I've completely graduated away from skating now, and I really don't even care about skating all that much anymore.
It's tough, right?
Yeah, and it was weird. I used to always think like skating this, skating that. And I'm like, wait a minute. I want to see like possession driving isn't as much about skating as it is about like timing and execution and precision in the offensive zone. And where does that come from? That comes from practice, right? And so like it's the reality that a lot of these kids, whether they're young or they're in the pros, they don't like practicing. Not all of them. I'm saying that there are examples, right? Now, I don't have that kind of information. But I think it's reasonable to assume that if you see like precision cycling going on at the junior level, that these kids are working hard somehow or another off the ice, watching film, and they're just developing that chemistry. So when I'm like ranking players and I'm trying to find, pluses and minuses, usually, I'm going to be honest with you, usually it'll take like, it could be one particular event, like even a shift, that will tilt the scales in the favor of another player. So I'll even say like, man, but that shift in that playoff game where he out-hustled everybody despite him being on the ice for a minute and a half, that's going to – and I always use that example with Farabee and Wallstrom. Whereas that one event made me – I was just like everybody else. And for all we know, Alvin Wallstrom could be a 40-goal scorer with Matthew Barzal as the center. But that one event that I saw, that one tournament game in Switzerland in November of 2018 with Farabee, I could not get over it. And that was the beginning, I think, of where now I look for, not all the time, but I look for like singular events. And some might say, well, that might be faulty to just base an assessment on one kid. But obviously I watch a lot more thereafter to kind of see if it's validated or not. Where you could tell, oh, that was just a one-shot deal. The kid's lazy. He doesn't play that hard. He's probably just did it because he had to go to the bathroom or something. I don't know. It could be anything. So yeah, it's a difficult process. It's not easy, and I'm starting to realize now, and I never thought this before, that I guess the parents and the kids read, my stuff, and I hate the fact that they read it, and I might write something negative. I have a conscience. I'm a parent. And so still, I owe it to you guys to be honest. So I am going to be honest, but there's still a little voice in my head like, oh, man, I just crushed this kid. Like Simon Edmondson, right? I'm critical of him. His poor parents. They're like, who is this Steve guy from Brooklyn? Never played the game. And he's sitting there and he's saying how, you make bad plays, you're a bad decision maker. Everyone else has said you're great. You're a top 5 pick, except this one guy. I said, what'd you say to him, Simon? I don't know who he is. He's kidding,
That's really funny to think about, actually. I love that story about Farabee. And to be honest with you, you were the first one. I think I mentioned this to you before. You were the first one I think you called him the two-way assassin, I believe was the name.
Yeah.
And I saw you ranked him, I think it was top 5, maybe it was 3rd even in the draft.
5 or 6 I had.
5 or 6. So I actually had like a gut instinct about him as well. I didn't see that shift, but I mean, in my opinion, I think he's a truly special player. I think shift that you see that shows his character, his work ethic. And if you see the Flyers previous season, I don't want to jump topics completely here, but he improved when everybody else didn't. And I think that's an example of the kid's character and how probably a taste of things to come. And I compared him a little bit to Simone Gagne, not so much that he's the same type of player.
I see it.
Yeah, but it's that two-way goal-scoring left winger that can play the PK, can play the power play, can kind of do everything for you. Only I think he actually has like captain material in him as well.
Sure.
So, to me, when you said that, I was like, I really hope we get this kid. And then he dropped to us and I couldn't believe it. I was like, I did not think he was coming to the Flyers.
Yeah. I mean, Farabee, you know what? And actually to kind of go back to what I said earlier about that one shift. That one shift was at the November 5 Nations. And I went to Plymouth to see the February 5 Nations. They hosted it, and Svechnikov was there, and Buquist. They were all the big names were there. It was a big tournament. And what happened to Farabee that year was, I think some people were pointing towards a drop in production as to why they were dropping him in rankings. Some people were knocking him down out of the first round. And what they weren't realizing is that Jack Hughes, the top line for that NTDP, I know we're going off the subject a little bit, but
no, it's fine. Go ahead.
The top line for that NTDP for the whole year was Jake Pavanka as center, Farabee on left wing, Wallstrom at right wing. Well, Jack Hughes was dominating the 17 level, so they brought him up. And so although Farabee was a left wing and stayed on that line, he was really the playmaker with Pavanka and Wallstrom. He was like the center who played the wing. So you saw him driving the cycle and just doing all the smart plays, whereas Pavanka's like a physical kid, Wallstrom's a physical kid. And so when Jack Hughes came, that took that element away from Farabee's game. And he kind of what are you going to do? It's Jack Hughes. I'm not going to dominate the puck instead of over him. And so that's why people were like, oh, I don't like the way Farabee's been playing lately. And I saw that tournament. I'm like, no. He's being a good teammate. He's staying within himself. He's not being selfish. He's not trying to make it about himself. And Wallstrom isn't like that. He's a little bit of a selfish player sometimes. And so that was the final, I guess, the validating point, that solidified that one shift he had in Switzerland 3 months prior. I'm like, he's going to stay in my top 10. I'm keeping him there, and that's it.
I love that. And honestly, I think your instincts paid off. I mean, he's outdoing Simone Gagne's pace at this point at 21 years old. He had an exceptional season. He's already on pace for 30 goals. And just like that one little moment detail thing that you're talking about. So I was covering the game at the Flyers game. And this was when Farabee first signed his contract, and he came over and he was sitting in the press area with German Rupture. Sure. And German Rupture doesn't speak much English. I don't know if he speaks any at this point, but I know he speaks a little bit. And he's obviously a very quiet kid. I go to all the dev camps, right? So I'm around them. I'm in the press box a little bit. And I would just be around him. And I just see such a quiet kid, always has his head down, never says anything. And all of a sudden I see Joel Farabee hanging out with him like it's his best friend. And that was one of those things where I started realizing it's like Farabee's younger than him. And he still kind of recognized that I need to pull this kid in. And that's what I saw. I was in there with them on the elevator, and I just saw I don't know, it's just something about his body language. Yeah. And I just see this little moment. I was like, this kid is future captain material. And then you see what he's doing now on top of that, the way he talks, the way he carries himself. There's a lot there. He's got some kind of element that it's like that secret sauce kind of thing.
He's a funny kid too. He's not like a serious guy. He's got a sense of humor. He's got a good personality. So you go back, you watch some of the old NTDP videos that they do when these kids are 16. It's funny because you see them wearing ugly Christmas sweaters, and they have to they asked him these crazy questions like, what would you do if you were stranded on an island? Like, what 2 things would you bring with you? And Fabry was like a comedian. He was like, poking fun at his friends and his line mates. And I'm not saying you need to have a personality to be a star in the NHL, but little things like that, it adds to the relationship that you build with these prospects when you evaluate them. You don't want them to just look at them as the typical robots looking into the camera, like, good game, puck's deep, backs against the wall, like type stuff. Like, you want to see these. It's
a confidence. You know what I mean? Sure. You want to see that they're confident under the pressure. And I remember even, now that you're saying it, I remember during his draft, he was like taking pictures and they were taking pictures of him. He was like joking around with the camera guy. Like he was the same age as like the 40-year-old who's taking pictures of him. And when I see that type of stuff, I'm just like, if you're not intimidated by adults when you're 19 and you're not caught up in the moment, I think that's really impressive. Because when I was that age, I could not have done that. I'd be like walking around like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
So when I see a kid do that, I'm like, that's different. And I'm a pretty charismatic person. So if I see somebody doing that at 19, I'm like, I'm paying attention to it.
Fly's got to treat him right. Just treat the kid right. I think he'll reward them, and it's really just right now, he's just scratching the surface too. Like you said, on pace for a 30-goal year this year. And, I'm not in that locker room, but I'm going to assume that just based on like the goal celebrations and the interactions on the bench, I have a feeling that the veterans like him too. And they're like, wow, this kid's kind of mature and he's legit and he's making us a better team or helping us win games and things like that.
100%, man. 100%. All right, let's move on to we'll probably circle back to that a little bit, but let's move back on to like the rankings this year. Now we talked about this a little bit prior to the show, that your rankings really haven't changed. So go to his site, the Draft Analyst, and you'll find those rankings listed there. You have the entire year past May, right? I think it was just on there today, right? So you have everything ranked, nice big spreadsheet with all the players on there, their height, their age and whatnot. So that's awesome. Do you see anything changing at all coming from, obviously your rankings are not going to be 1 for 1. And this year I think is a complete crapshoot. Like anybody 1 to 15, I think there's going to be a lot of variation there. But do you think that there's a chance that, Powers doesn't go at 1, like Seth Jones didn't go at 1, which in retrospect definitely makes sense because of, Nate McKinnon's incredible. Right. And then, Drouin maybe should have dropped in that draft. Right. And then, but there are some goal scorers in this draft. There's usually a premium on goal scoring. There's a premium on centers as well. Do you think there's any chance that Powers takes a drop down? Do you think there's anybody else who might sneak into the 1 or 2 that's unexpected beyond Powers or, oh my God, why is his name escaping me? I'm sorry. Beniers, thank you. Ooh.
Yeah. Listen, there's a lot of news. The news cycle is crazy with this draft because new stuff is coming out. It seems like every day. Well, with Power now, he was, I think, after his World Championship performance for Canada, where he's playing 20-something minutes a game, and he's one of Canada's best defensemen, and they win gold. And it's a men's tournament against all mostly ex-NHLers or NHLers, and Gerard Gallant's the coach, and he's increasing his ice time over NHL players, defensemen. I think that is what was like his singular moment where we're like, okay, there's our consensus number 1 pick. There's our number 1 guy. And then what happens right around that time is he comes out and says, and this could be by design, where his agent, who knows, where he said, I want to go back to college, maybe, like wink, wink. And Sabres fans, Sabres win the lottery. They're like, well, what do you mean you want to go back to college? He's like, yeah, I want to go back to college. And I guess when he expounded on it, he said that COVID robbed him of a traditional college experience, which I guess is fair. And that, he wants to have that. Now, I would think that the most important thing was that Michigan was a pretty good team and they had a shot at winning the NCAA title, and they got robbed of that. Remember, because of COVID, they were like removed from the freaking tournament, and they have a loaded lineup. So anyway, to basically, talk about what like the question that you asked is a goal scoring. Yes, it's at a premium, but now I think because of Powers, I guess, quote unquote, apprehension, where he might not play right away, the team picking first and second and third might say, well, listen, like we want someone to show up right away. We have our systems. We have our development systems that we want these kids to get involved right away. The problem with these college kids is that the organizations can't touch them. If they're in the NCAA, it's the NCAA rules. The organizations can't invite them to dev camps. They can't assign them to ELCs. It's not like any other situation.
Right.
So because of that, organizations like to lock these kids up early. That's why we see the CHL kids sign. You'll see like the number 4 pick, like let's say Mitch Moore in 2015, sign this deal right away. Well, why did he do that? Because he's now under organizational control. He could go. They just don't have to worry about him going anywhere else, so having a change of heart or anything. Whereas with college, that's a trump card and the league's got to do something about it because it's so stupid. Where the kid could say, "Sorry, I'm staying here for 4 years. I want to get my degree." And it could be like he has a girlfriend and the girlfriend wants to stay there. I mean, it could be any reason why a kid would stay in college, or they just don't want to play for that organization. It's leverage. So I think because of that, it's even more wide open now than we thought. It's more wide open right now than it ever was. We thought 2 weeks ago it wasn't, and now it's wide open. So those wingers, right? William Eckland, Kent Johnson, Mason McTavish, Cole Sillinger. I mean, these guys, Dylan Gunther, they're all in the running. So there's no way we could know who's going to be first overall right now. We thought it was going to be Power a couple weeks ago, but after what he said, and the other thing too with Buffalo is that they really don't need a left defenseman. And although they'll always say never draft for need when you piss, they have Rasmus Dahlin and a couple other guys there. Although I do think that Power makes them a better team, but they desperately need like a tough physical center type, which is why Beniers might be a better option. But
and that program, that U.S. program is exceptional. So maybe they just go, hey, he's going to be mature. Beniers in that.
Yeah, but now I think Beniers. Oh God, we could just keep peeling back the layers with this one, the onion, because now I think Beniers is saying the same thing because Beniers, Johnson, and Power all teammates. So Michigan's a great school, one of the best in the country, beautiful campus. I get it. If you know anyone who's ever played hockey in Michigan, they will tell you that like you are a rock star on that campus for hockey because Michigan's a hockey, it's a hockey state. And so maybe they want to feel that a little bit. I don't know, but man, it's crazy.
Like you said, they have a stacked team. They could think like, hey, we have a shot at a championship before we go.
And they're getting more. They're getting Luke Hughes. They're getting more recruits coming in there. It's absolutely bananas. The situation surrounding the first overall pick right now. And I really don't even know what to think. Owen Power's my number 1 guy. And he's going to stay there for like the next 8 days until it's decided. But, when I do my live stream for the draft, I wish I could be really, show animosity and happiness and excitement. But I'm just going to sit there and just thankfully wait for the names to be called so we could just move on from the pain and focus on and the fans, really. The fans could focus on the players themselves. Because right now, go to read the message boards, go on Twitter, go on podcasts. Fans don't know what to think anymore. They're all like confused. The fans are picking in the top 10.
I haven't even focused on rankings this year because I'm kind of like, I already anticipated this. I said this to people like over 12 months ago. I was like, with the type of season we're having, do not expect any of these rankings to really matter to the same degree they normally do, just because there's going to be some guys who were missed too. And that teams maybe had a booking on them a year ago or whatever, and they liked him a while ago, or, they had a prospect on that team, so they got to see more of him just over the time. So let me ask you this. Well, first of all, the one thing I did hear about Powers is that apparently a lot of his family lives up in like near Buffalo. So he was trying to reassure people that he's going like, hey, like I like Buffalo. Like it's not a knock on Buffalo. Yeah. I think, but don't you think they would potentially even benefit from him kind of I know this sounds weird, but holding back a year? I know the control thing definitely matters. I 100% agree with you. But they're not, their situation is not the best right now. So do they really want to bring Powers into that type of mess like currently, when they want to like maybe get it resolved first and then be like, oh well, now we got something to get excited about, like come on over, Yeah,
that's a great point. And I think you can look at it both ways, right? Because usually, it's this argument that we've had for years is what's better for a player's development. We all argue it, right? Is Europe against men better? Is Canadian Major Junior better? Is being in the AHL better? I'm of the opinion that the AHL is the best developmental league in the world. Better than the KHL, better than the SHL. You cannot replicate. No game replicates the NHL game better than the AHL.
The AHL, 100%.
And so that's why I'm a big fan of it. But as far as Powers' development, if he stays in Michigan, it's proven that like it really can't hurt. The top guys, they'll be top guys anywhere. So if you watched Owen Power this year as a freshman, he was one of the best freshman defensemen in the country and playing like a mature veteran. Mm-hmm. He plays at the U18 Worlds, U20, the men's Worlds, I'm sorry, against adults. Youngest guy in the tournament, or one of them at least. One of the best defensemen in the tournament. So like clearly he's heading in the right direction. Buffalo, they have a lot of like unanswered questions. So, the Jack Eichel thing is probably the biggest thing that they need to deal with right now. And I agree with you that, yeah, they could still draft him. Who cares if he stays in Michigan another year? I'm just like, I don't even think that he's going to be the number one pick, but I mean, that's just my gut feeling. But yeah, I think, well, it could be Eckland. It could be, because they draft Swedes all the time. It could be a bunch of kids.
He looks good.
But yeah, I think that a lot of these kids, there's one little thing, and I'm speculating, but about a lot of these kids is, and I've been pissed about this, and I've talked publicly about it, and I try my best in my very Brooklyn brash, curt way, that you got to be patient with these kids. And a lot of these young kids come into the league, and the fans turn on them, right? The fans were in love with them, and then they go to the World Juniors, and the media plays into it, right? Frank Saravalli, I got mad at Frank. I like him a lot. You know what I mean? I like his coverage, and he's a great journalist, but he jumped on the bashing Alexei Lafreniere bandwagon without any real context. I'm like, come on, man, you can't do that. If you've been watching the games, you can't take a kid out of the Quebec League, and everyone's going to be Sidney Crosby, and I think that's part of the problem too, is we look at the stats. So maybe these kids are like, you know what? No, I don't want to deal with that abuse. I know that I could just spend a year in college, get drafted. I could have a clear mind. I could play my game my way. I don't have to worry about ice time and the bickering going on social media and hearing people call me a bust. Like there are like Twitter accounts that are called literally like Jack Hughes is a bust or Nolan Patrick is a bust or whatever. And it's like, what do you gain? What do you gain by doing that? Does it make you happy to crap on a 18-year-old kid? Do it to the veterans who get paid millions of dollars. Don't do it to the kids. And I'm not saying that in a like weak coddling kind of way. It's just impatience. Let the kids develop. They've been the best players at their level every age. But now you're like, okay, everybody that you play against, they're now 8 to 10 years older than you. It's not easy. It's difficult.
And they were also the best players.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. See, that's my point. That no one's going to be like, oh, he's the number one pick. I'm not going to play that hard tonight. Like, no. No, it's actually the opposite. They're like, oh, number one overall pick. I'll show you. Welcome to the NHL. Yeah. And so actually I got asked that in the podcast last night about Lafreniere, is that a lot of people were like, hey, Steve, you said Lafreniere is just like nasty, mean, abrasive, throws elbows. He's a dirty player sometimes. I'm like, he ain't going to do that with like Colton Parayko or freaking, I don't know, any of the tough guys in the division. He's 19 and those guys are 28, 20. They got man strength. He's not going to elbow like Sidney Crosby or elbow, Jacob Trouba. He's going to, wait until he gets into the league a couple of years before he starts doing that stuff. So, patience, very important.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I think, you would think after seeing all the evidence of that, I think it's like players like Cole Caulfield who come in at 5'7", and all of a sudden, again, it's not his role to be physical, and he's scoring goals. I think people they see that and they think, oh, well, if you didn't develop that same route, then you obviously aren't going to be a great player. But there's so much evidence that it doesn't work that way. There's so many guys who didn't come in the league, even Nate McKinnon, right? Like he came in, he was a 60-point player. He didn't come in even like Patrick Kane. And, he didn't come up with the same production. He came in with relatively modest for a first overall. And then all of a sudden, you know what I mean? It's like he becomes like maybe the best player in the league. And not that he didn't stand. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, Vinny LeCavalier, those are two, might be a little dated examples.
Couturier.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically there aren't that many variables involved when these kids are developing. It really is like the coaches and the staff probably tell them like, hey, just be yourself, man. Learn our systems, learn our culture, be receptive to criticism, work hard, practice hard on and off the ice. And eventually you're going to see it's just like any job. Like if you work at Subway, like you are a lot faster at making sandwiches at like your 6th or 8th month there than you were at your first month there. That's why it always blows my mind when like, oh my goodness, now he's breaking out of his shell. He has 4 assists in the last 8 games. Well, yeah, it's an adjustment period. Like you gotta, and there's so many other, like I said, the variables where like you have to study the goalies, and there are goalies who like if you're a guy, let's say like Farabee, who has a really good wrist shot. Well, you have to learn which goalies aren't strong with the glove. They have a better blocker than glove. They crouch down low. Or they explode. There's so many things to study, and for some of these kids, it's too much because they're used to playing. They're in their comfort zone, like I always talk about. In the major junior leagues, and they're the top dog, and they know that they can just score at will, 15, 20 scoring chances a game. No big deal. Well, what kind of a player are you going to be when you only have 1 or 2 scoring chances a week, if that, because you're only playing 6, 7 minutes a game? You got to reinvent yourself. You got to learn. And, I wish that fans, had that inside like look into the mind and the life of these teenage kids, these young high prospects. Because especially in hockey, where there's a physical element involved, where really one hit could end your career, it's not easy. And that's why I always preach to them, yeah, you could boo the high-priced free agent, but, with the kids, at least give it a couple of years. You know what I mean? Like, you could boo them all you want, but be a little bit more patient.
Yeah, totally agree. So let me end on this for the draft section. Is there anybody like Caulfield that could find their way down the boards because Caulfield, I think, was ranked as high as 7 inside the top 10, which justifiably so. I mean, the kid's a fantastic goal scorer. But do you see anybody that maybe wouldn't make it to, because I do want to get in the Flyers options. Do you see anybody that maybe could sneak into the Flyers range, which is at 13?
There are 2 guys who I guess are like, I guess you would consider them like, I mean, there's a bunch of undersized scoring wingers, and there are a lot of guys that if you go to my blog and my draft report's coming out in a couple of days, it's free. You'll see I've like all these detailed reports on these kids. There's one kid in particular. William Eckland, to me, is like this year's Cole Caulfield, but he's rated higher, right? So he's not big.
He's
he's like 5'10", but he didn't have that much of a growth spurt from a couple of years ago. So he might be generously listed at 5'10". I think they list him at like 5'10", 175, but he could be on that 5'9", 5'8 and a half range. He's a dynamic scorer, right? And now I think I saw something where it said that a first overall pick that was we've never had like any first overall picks on the 5'10", and if we did, they struggled or something along those lines. Like a top pick that's small doesn't really make it because Pat Kane was like 5'11" and Jack Hughes was 5'11", so they used the 5'10" as the cutoff. But I think the fact that he played against adults is going to help him translate, and he's also more versatile than just scoring. There's a kid in Russia named Alexander Kizakov. He is small. He's like, well, not like midget small, like Smurf small, like 5'6", 5'7". He's about 5'9", 5'10", but only weighs about 160 pounds. But he was second in the league this year, the Russian Junior League in scoring. And what I loved about him was that he was like the top dog on a big time program, right? Dynamo MSK. And, so he's tearing up the league. And then the older guys on that team were promoted to the VHL and some even to the KHL. And then when the MHL playoffs, the Junior League playoffs started, that organization brought all of them back. So now you got this loaded team. And not only were they loaded, but their opponent in the final was also loaded. Local Yaroslavl against Dynamo MSK. So now I'm like, oh, Kisakov, man, he's going to lose ice time. He's probably not going to have as many opportunities. It's going to hurt his draft stock. And I'll tell you what, that guy easily. Now they had 4 top lines. Dynamo, both teams had 4 top lines. They rolled them. It wasn't like they had a checking line and a support line and an energy line and then a big gun line. They had 4 big gun lines each team. It was great. And Kisakov easily was one of the most dangerous players every shift. He didn't score all the time, but he was the most dangerous. And on top of that, he was getting under the skin of the opposition, and they were like pushing, like trying to intimidate him. And he wasn't standing for it. He was pushing back, and he was kind of like it reminded me that the Elias Pettersson move, where like someone like tried to like hit him and hurt him a little bit, and he like the next shift went and like broke his ankles and like scored a goal. Like, that's what you get. So he's that kind of a player, and he will be there for the Flyers at 15. But the thing is, he's a wing. So I don't know if the Flyers want to go wing again. Right. All these consecutive drafts. But there'll be guys that a lot of us are, I guess you consider them to be divisive, but not as much as Caulfield. But he was he was a 60 or 70 goal scorer.
70, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like, oh my God. Like, and the problem with Caulfield, and the reason why I was higher on him, I had him, I think, at 15, was that DeBrincat was a first rounder for me. Yeah. And I think I was one of the only few guys that had DeBrincat as a first round. And people were like, oh, he's small. He's a product of McDavid. I'm like, oh, no, you got to watch this kid play. And so I think we've learned our lesson now that size, specifically with forwards, with defense, I could kind of see it. But with forwards, if you could score, man, you're good to go. At least give him a chance. And it's worthy of a first round pick if you got a kid scoring 40, 50 goals in junior hockey. Give him a shot.
Yeah. And Caulfield as well is tenacious. Like he's like, I don't want to compare him to I guess if somebody compared him. Somebody who watches the show messaged me and compared him to a little bit of Danny Briere. And I see a little bit of that because Danny Briere was kind of you didn't want to, he was a feisty player. Like he was small, but he would hurt you. He would find different ways to hurt you. He would be dirty if he had to. It wasn't.
That's why he got drafted in the first round in 90. That 96 draft was terrible. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead, please. That's
why he got drafted in I think it was it Arizona or Phoenix that drafted
Arizona. Yeah, I think it was Phoenix.
Phoenix. Yeah, he was a late round pick in 1996, and it was like even then, like, oh my God, like is he really?
They waived him too.
Yeah. I mean, he was a guy that they remember talking about him, how dynamically skilled he was, but he's really small. And then he became the guy, and later on Martin St. Louis, who wasn't drafted, where it's like, oh, the small player, he's a Danny Briere, he's a Martin St. Louis.
Yeah.
He's Theo Fleury, Danny Briere, and Martin St. Louis. Every small player was like one of those three guys.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing different types, right? Like you said, Caulfield is aggressive. DeBrincat is abrasive. And then they could finish, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. It's again, kind of one of those saying there's like one thing of their game that makes them drop down. So let's go into Flyers options here. So kind of talked about it a little bit now. I have some names here listed here. I do want to start with my last one on the list too, because I was really interested in it to when you were actually going into the Joel Farabee story. But Chaz Lucius.
Yeah.
I find him very interesting. You said that he had somewhat of a skating problem, right? So we kind of go back to that. And so did Tyson Forrester, so did TK apparently at one point, though I never saw that. But I'm interested in that because you said work ethic, and I think that's awesome, and high end scoring ability, like playmaking and scoring ability. Give me a little preview on him, and do you think the Flyers potentially could take a jump on him, though? I think you said he had a knee injury.
Yeah, well, so he would be a great pick for the Flyers at what is it, 13?
13, yep.
I have him ranked, I want to say I got him ranked like 16, so it's right in that wheelhouse. The thing with Lucius is I had him ranked number 3rd overall in my preseason poll, and that was before the injury, and he was on the U17 NTDP. He was a Minnesota kid, a good hockey family, and he just was that center. Like he was a dual threat. I didn't view him as just a goal scorer, and he drove a really dangerous top line for the NTDP that had Dylan Duke, a little guy. Speaking of Caulfield, it's kind of like Dylan Duke is a similar player on one side, and then Sasha Pasov over on the other side. The problem with that line is that all three are shooters, right? You have a line of nothing but shooters. Now they made it work, and they had good chemistry. But what happened with Lucius was he got hurt early. I don't know if it happened. I think it happened during the offseason, and I think he blew out his knee. And so because of that, the NTDP did not have their number one center. He's got good size. He wasn't like their all-world Jack Hughes or Trevor Zegras or Alex Turcotte type. He was more like just the best player or the best prospect on a really good team. Not a team full of blue chippers everywhere. The NTDP every year is usually more like one really good top line and a whole bunch of hardworking types and future college forwards and defensemen, not what we saw with, Cam York and Jack Hughes. That's historic.
Yeah.
But in any event, so he hurts himself, he gets hurt, and clearly it bothered him. He worked incredibly hard to get back. And when he did get back, actually, no, I think he got hurt during the season. So I stand corrected. He got hurt early in the season. Well, either way, he came back and he went on a goal scoring tear, but he wasn't himself. And I'm wondering if he rushed coming back because of the draft situation. He rushed coming back because he he was, he felt bad for his team and he wanted to make the team because the team was hit by injuries all year, not just with Lucius. The whole team was hit by injuries. And so then he had to eventually take himself out of the lineup and shut down for the season. And I'm wondering, did he come back early? And again, like, was he healthy and he got hurt again, or was he not healthy but he rushed it? It's one of those questions that I can't answer, and only he knows, and his agent knows, and the coaching staff knows. So, the Flyers have a history, up and down. Now, Travis Konechny, I think, had a really bad injury his draft year. Maybe was it a knee? I remember watching some video where he got hurt really bad and was like on the bench, like screaming in pain. But he was such a hard worker. And then we were like, wait a minute, he's a hard worker guy, this Konechny. Isn't going to impact the way he plays. With Lucius, when he did play, he wasn't the same. He was a different player. He wasn't the same, he didn't look like a number one center in those 15 games he played this year. So I'm a little concerned about it. But what you do get is outstanding goal scoring ability. One of the best shots releases in the draft. Nose for the net, 6 stick handler, right? He could stick handle and tight, create his own shot. He's just not like a pure playmaker, facilitator. My line mates are going to be better because of me. It's and there are a lot of times I watch games where he would just be in the slot or in the bumper position or in the low slot in front of the net, and his wingers were doing all the work. And sometimes with centers, you want to see them get involved in the cycle a little bit, be the bus driver, so to speak. So that's why I knocked him down from 3 to 16, but he's still a really good prospect. And I'm hoping he's committed to Minnesota. So he'll play there next year, big time program. And, it might be, if the Flyers do draft him, it goes back to what we talked about, patience. I don't think he's going to show up there right away and be like the cat's meow. Probably take him a full year. He's going to work out a lot more, have the facilities to take advantage of. But definitely an interesting prospect. Again, I had him ranked number 3. I was so high on him, and then I had to drop him.
What do you think about guys like Mctavish or Johnson? Do they have a chance of kind of dropping to the Flyers, you think, by any chance?
I don't think
top 10.
I don't think McTavish will. The reason why is he was in that range for most of the season, and then he goes to frickin' the U18 Worlds and puts on a show. And we all know the recency bias that's always tied to those tournaments, those short tournaments. And he really did put on a show. And with him, you get the toughness and the meanness in addition to the two-way play, the intangibles. He's got a deadly wrist shot. He's got good hands, leadership qualities. So, I mean, Central Scouting ranked him ahead of Matt Beniers. That was okay, all right. You're going to base that off of 10 games in Switzerland, and because no one's ranking Mason McTavish ahead of Matt Beniers after last year, and they both played full season, or 2 seasons ago, and they both played full seasons. McTavish with Peterborough in the OHL, and Beniers as a kid on the NTDP. And Beniers had a really good season this year for Michigan. I mean, Beniers, he has benchmark, he has legitimate, gold star moments in his draft year, right? Guy, you could point to one of several, whether it be his play as a freshman in Michigan, whether it be his play at the World Juniors to go from the last forward to the second line center and helping him win freaking gold.
Yep.
Those to making the men's world championship team, even though he was kind of like a 4th line guy, then got hurt. Minor ankle injury, I think, towards the end there. But McTavish won't be there. As far as Johnson, I'm really high on him. I got him ranked number 4. So if the Flyers board looks like mine, he'll be gone. The only reason why I could see him dropping is if teams think that he's just pure offense and there's no room for anything else, improvement in other areas.
Right.
I don't want a guy to score 80 points. I want a guy to score 40, but be tough to play against. But Johnson's not a soft player, and he plays college hockey. So it's not like he was this kid who took advantage of a lesser league. He was the top scoring freshman in the country among draft eligibles. And the only guy who outscored him was Bordelot, who's I think a 1st round pick last year, or what was he, a high 2nd round pick of the Sharks. So if any of those guys are there, if those guys are there, the Flyers got to take them. I mean, I think they would be BPA types.
Yeah. So what about somebody like Sillinger or LaRue? I think that's how you say it, Zachary LaRue, right?
Okay, so the big spread between the two of my rankings, right? Much higher on Sillinger than LaRue, or LaRue. I think that's how they pronounce it.
Yeah.
So Sillinger is a great prospect, and he's got NHL bloodlines. His dad was Mike Sillinger.
Yeah.
And what I love about, yeah,
Former
playing
Flyer.
His son was one of the top rookies in the WHL, right? High WHL pick 2 years ago. And then because of the shutdown, he went to the USHL and blew it up. I mean, he was one of the best players in the league. His team wasn't that good. His team was pretty terrible. But it was like, one or two guys on that squad. He was the main guy. He was on pace for some crazy numbers. And he's got everything going for him, right? Probably the best wrist shot in the class, better than Mctavish, better than Lucius. Ridiculous wrist shot. But he's a dual threat. He's a better playmaker, I think, than either Mctavish or Lucius. The issue with him is the skating, and the skating issue is more stylistic than it is actual speed and getting from point A to point B, because he's like an upright skater, and it's just the kind of like environment that we're in now, not just in prospect evaluation, but hockey as a whole, where everybody's got an opinion. And you have a lot of experts out there who literally have dedicated their lives to, let's say, the art of skating or the science of skating. Mm-hmm. And so they'll tell you, oh, mechanically that guy is bad. But then, I mentioned in a few of my podcasts that look at how many like ugly skaters there are who are just outstanding NHL players, whether they now or within the last 5-10 years.
Scott Arnold was like a joke in Philadelphia because he literally had Arnold down. He would fall down every game like 3 or 4 times. He scored 40 goals in the league.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, Mark Stone is a guy that was, I mean, I would say pound for pound, he's one of the top 3 plays in the game, all things considered, right? If you think of the two-way play, the leadership, the scoring touch, the everything. Yeah. Mark Stone is a top 3 play, in my opinion, maybe top 5. And so he had his skating mechanics were horrible, and then you see him on a breakaway with Nate McKinnon like chasing after him. I mean, it's all about anticipation. So I think with Stillman, he is quick enough. You know what I mean? Where it's not like he's going to be in a breakaway. Remember, there was a breakaway. Was it last year in Dallas, or was it this year with Montreal, where Corey Perry had a breakaway, and it was all over social media because he had a clean breakaway from the center, from the red line in, and someone caught him within like 2 strides from like his own goal line. And, it was like pretty sad. Like that's not the case with Sillinger. Like if he's got a step or two on you, you're not catching him. Like it's just how it is. I mean, for you to catch him, everything would have to align, and he might have to slow himself down. So,
But there's a lot to what you're saying. Like even Chris Pronger was never fast at all, and yet he never got beat. Michael Handzus is another guy. He was slow as bricks. I mean, that guy, he would move his feet and he'd go nowhere.
But he was a great shutdown center, right? A great, one of the better two-way centers in the league in his prime.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, it's funny, and I make mistakes too. I said that Sasha Pasov was and he's a draft prospect that for this year could be a target for the Flyers. Great one-timer. I called him a dizzying dual threat last year when I wrote my preview for this year's draft, because I felt like the games I watched, he was dizzying. He was like moving around a lot in different directions, and he was passing and shooting. And then I watched him this year, and I'm like, he can't skate, and all he does is shoot. That's all he does. So I had to kind of like alter my assessment. You know what I mean? And I'm not embarrassed to say it that I was wrong. And so I think that, if you want to have fun, go look at some of the old hockey news like previews, and like Keith Tkachuk can't skate, Doug Weight can't skate.
I love that stuff.
Jeff, I don't know if you remember, you might not, but Jake Sanderson's father's Jeff Sanderson. I think, did Jeff Sanderson play for the Flyers? No, played for the Canucks and the Whalers. Yeah, in the early 90s, late 90s, he was at Buffalo Sabres, and he was one of the fastest guys in the league. Like, there was a period where he was just a breakaway threat all the time, and the announcers would be like, "Oh, he's the last guy you want to see in open ice." But in the scouts quote in the hockey news were like, "He's really got to work on his." Joe Sakic. They said Joe Sakic had to work on his skating. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like
it's like
we're wrong
here. Yeah.
It's crazy. Brian Leach is another one. Brian Leach got to work on his skating.
They said that about Travis Konechny when we drafted him. I remember that. That was like the big knock on him. That's why he dropped. At least that's what they said he dropped all the way to the Flyers. And one of the first things I noticed, I was like, skating does not seem to be much of an issue here. And actually, if you really look at his skating, he's typically the fastest skater on the Flyers. Yeah. He's usually got a bunch of breakaways. So it's like, and I agree with you. Like even last year after we drafted Forrester, I actually interviewed his skating coach afterwards. So I was like, let's talk to the skating coach. Let's see what he has to say. And he's like, look, he's never going to be the best skater in the league. I was like, but He's like, he's already fixed his skating from the time that he's drafted. And like you saw it this year, he's able to play in the AHL, highly successful. So it's all adjustable. So without me picking names, is there anybody else in that range that you think the Flyer fans should kind of be aware of?
Well, I hate to do this because, need is always the need versus BPA thing is always like a point of contention for not just the scouting staffs, but the fans themselves. Remember, BPA, best player available, is not the guy with the best stats or the guy with it's the guy that is on the team's board internally that we have no clue what it looks like, right? We have no idea. So like the Flyer scouts, they could have, let's say, a guy like Matt Kournianos, who big time goal scorer for the USA in the USHL, going to Harvard, ridiculous stats, one of the best, hardest workers in the draft, right? In terms of effort, he's always moving. Skating is not pretty at all, but who really cares? Because he's always the, dog on the bone type of mentality where he's always got to have the puck. He could be like, let's say, third on the Flyers board. You know what I mean? And so if the Flyers are down to it and all the fans have their hearts set on one particular guy or two particular guys, and the Flyers announced this Kournianos kid, everyone's going to be like, wait a minute, no, he's not the best player available, but to the Flyers he was. So anyway, to answer your question, there are a couple of guys I don't want to I'm not going to focus on defense because the reason why is that this is not a defense-heavy draft in the beginning. In the entire draft, I'm sorry, it's a defense-heavy draft overall, but not in the top. Like it's not gonna be like 2012 where you're gonna have like 8 of the first 15 picks are gonna be defensemen. Right now, you have only four of them, and they're all gonna be gone probably within the top 10. Right, Luke Hughes, Simon Edvinsson, Owen Power, obviously, and then Brent Flahr, the righty. So there's this kid, Carson Lamos, I'm a little high on, but he's got some injury concerns. He'll be there for the Flyers if they want to take a gamble on him. But they really won't have any other option but to take a forward, it seems, if they go by the consensus that is not, the Philadelphia Flyers draft board. So for argument's sake, if they're going by a consolidated ranking of guys like myself and Central Scouting, that in that range of 13, you're going to see a lot of wingers, right? A lot of scoring wings. Couple of centers there. Right? You got the Russian center Svechkov, two-way type. He was the best player on his team at multiple levels, and now he's getting traded to a big-time program. He's NHL caliber. He's got pro written all over him. As far as the wingers go, the Flyers do not need wings, right? They don't. They're loaded on each side, I think. They got a lot of promising prospects on either side, left or right. But, it doesn't hurt to maybe add another one, I guess. So if they want to go for a guy like Nikita Chibrikov, the physical Russian guy, the kid I like a lot is Ayrton Martino going to Clarkson from the USHL. But he's just, you talk to people from Omaha, they're like, this guy helped carry our team, where he's like one of the best breakaway threats available in the draft. But he's also, a pretty good playmaker as well. So I don't know what the Flyers are going to do as far as center ice is concerned. The Flyers usually draft out of the Quebec League every now and again, and there's a couple of kids there. Leroux, we kind of skipped over him a little bit, so I'll touch on Leroux. Leroux is like a Keith Tkachuk, right? He's a throwback. He's mean. He's aggressive. Not the best skater in the world, but it's not like an issue because he's a dual threat playmaking wing. He's been suspended, I think, 4 times this year for. Not all for dirty hits, one for taking a helmet off, I think. Another one for disrespecting an official maybe or whatever. He's a tough kid. He's a scoring power wing, I guess. The issue I have with Leroux, and it's the reason why I rank him in the 40s or 50s, but everybody else has him closer in the first round.
Yeah.
That because of the bubble, they only played 4 or 5 teams, Halifax that is, and he was a top line guy, and his center was Elliot Dinoye. So the Flyers know all about him. And he did a lot of his scoring against the worst team in that bubble and didn't do all that well against the best team in the bubble. It's a huge disparity. Out of his 35 points, I think 6 against the good team and 29 against the bad, or 20 against the bad team. And the games, when you watch the games, you see that he was neutralized and ineffective. So I'm thinking all right, you can't really do that. You got to be the best player on the ice most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. So I think, he's more of a high risk or high reward type prospect. But again, he's a wing. So, and then you got the goalies, right? You got the 2 goalies, Kosin, Wallstead. Some feel that both will be gone within the top 10. I think both the franchise caliber goalies in the Flyers situation, they don't necessarily need a goalie because they have, not only are they have Carter Hart, but they also have these kids in Urson. Yeah, they have. Yeah, exactly. And they're going to be in Lehigh Valley. There's a good chance, one might even be called up this year to see time in Philadelphia just to kind of give them a taste. Ostamenko, right? Is he the other kid?
Yeah, he was injured all last year, but he was exceptional in the AHL prior to that. ECHL he dominated, and then AHL call up.
And then Urson with his great year for Brenus in the SHL, and so I think if you draft a guy like Kosa or Wallstead, it would just make the Flyers stronger. It wouldn't necessarily address a need or make them better for next year or within 2 or 3 years. But it's just, like I said, it's all about contingencies and building up competition. But, they really, I don't want to say they're playing with house money because they could definitely, it wouldn't hurt them to make up for some guys that have fallen off that we were initially high on.
Yeah.
We're wondering about German Rutsov, Pascal Lebert, some of those other high picks from previous years, Nolan Patrick, where maybe the Flyers are like, you know what, let's, Patrick and Rutsov being centers. And I like both of them, by the way. I'm not giving up on them just yet, but I'm just saying is if I'm
risk management.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
pretty much.
And to be honest with you, I mean, and I don't think they're getting traded particularly, but I was thinking about even the scenario. Let's say the Flyers move somebody. Let's say they move one of their goalie prospects in a trade, right? The Flyers are looking to bulk up their D. They're going to have to trade for some veteran potentially. I did just get a text message saying that Shea Weber is potentially going to be exposed right now in expansion draft, which is kind of crazy to think about. But the Flyers are going to go out there and probably try to get a D-man. It might cost a prospect, right? One of these high-end prospects, maybe even a Bobby Brink. So maybe at that point you bring in another right winger because you're moving Bobby Brink in a trade, right? That's a scenario I could see as well.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep rolling here. I think that was pretty good for the draft. I do want to talk about Flyers players, and then we'll finish up quickly here at the end because I've taken up a lot of your time. But this is
fine.
This is a great episode so far. So
sure.
All right, so let's talk about Flyers youth, and I want to talk about these guys together. We just talked about Patrick, but I want to talk about Patrick and TK. The two of them, quite frankly, before this recent head injury, it wasn't really a knock that Patrick was a bust. It was like some people were saying he slowed it out of the gate. But again, 30 points in his first 2 years, that's not necessarily a complete failure for a 19, 20-year-old in my mind. And then TK obviously was evolving. These two guys were good friends. It's very obvious. And they probably, I assume they still are good friends. And obviously Patrick played with Provorov as well, won MVP. And I kind of point that out to people that he's on the same team as Ivan Provorov and he won the MVP. And Provorov is exceptional. So I don't like the idea of giving him a Patrick. But what do you see? First, let's say TK, because I think that one's a little bit easier. And then what do you think about Patrick and his ability to kind of come back? And I'll just start off with this about Patrick, is that I do think a lot of his problems this year were conditioning based and his inability to really train in an off season. We were following him kind of in the background. He did some tournaments with Ryan White up in Canada, and that's pretty much all the training he had in the off season after missing a year plus. So I do want to be a little tenuous to say that is a reflection of his game at the moment. But what do you think about TK and Patrick as a guy who kind of scouted both?
I love Konechny. He had a I guess was it the second half where he was really he slummed. He had a great start, and we're like, oh my God, he's going to score 30 goals or 35 goals, and he ended up slumping a little bit. So it was like a tale of two seasons. But I love him. He like I said, in a way, there were games where he was the bus driver for that team, and it says a lot when you have a Giroux and you have a Voracek and a JVR and a Couturier. So, you can't give up on him. I mean, these guys, I don't think he's Jeff Skinner, where you're going to get bad year, good year, bad year, good year. I don't think he's going to be like that. With Konechny, it just was, like I said, non-standard conditions, right? The freaking long layoff, the COVID, the weird, and I used the same excuse that I did with the Rangers, right? Where everyone's beating up the Rangers. The Flyers had 4 cup contenders in their division. One of them I thought was going to be the Flyers to make it 5. But so that's 32 games out of 56. That's about what, almost 60%, 55% of your games are against cup contenders, where in a normal year, you're only going to play those teams about 40% of the time. You got a lot of like the Flyers didn't have the road trip to California where they would have played 3 non-playoff teams, right? Or the road trip to Western Canada to play the Oilers and the Flames and Vancouver where they were a mess. And those are the opportunities for guys like Konechny to maybe find their game. Maybe it was Konechny, just wanted to get away. There's so many things to consider. So I'm not looking into this season at all. I love him as a player. And I think that he's going to be a leader, like a key core guy in the team moving forward. I would not like touch anything. I would keep him and just kind of like ride it out and see where it goes. I mean, you could be disappointed in a guy, right? It's fair as fans, especially because he signed his deal, right? He got his contract, at least his first big one. So there's no issue with that at all. As far as Patrick goes, I think the problem with Patrick, besides the health, is that we keep focusing on the guys drafted after him. So it's like we could have had Elias Pettersson, we could have had Cale McCall, we could have had Miro Heiskanen or Suzuki or anyone. Like Flyers fans would say, we would have had any one of those. But at the same time, you really can't look at it that way. That Nolan Patrick was absolutely deserving to be the first overall pick, and not just the second overall. He was deserving to be the first overall pick. But with injuries, it's all about healing, and it's happened before where guys have missed time because of significant injuries, and they literally took a year off to just cleanse their body and get healthy and rest and do whatever. Yeah, the fans will get a little impatient, and obviously when you're paying a guy, you want him to kind of perform in one way or another. But at the same time, like the Flyers have to, it's basically risk management, like you said, or like, okay, so we keep having these things pop up. He hasn't been able to play all that much. Where do we see him moving forward, right? Do we see him being a number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 center? Are fans going to change their expectations? I'm a fan of his, but at the same time, you got to factor in that, I don't think he wasn't a Fletcher pick, right? He was a Hextall pick, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So, he's not Fletcher's guy. Is Flahr the scouting director? Is he still there? The
Brent Flahr is the assistant GM, but he wasn't the head of scouting when Patrick was taken. That was Chris Pryor. Okay. Him and Ron Hextall were let go together. So that's something to consider as well. Is like there's really no. I guess you don't have the similar, the same bond or allegiance for lack of a better term. And also, to your point, Hextall was former Brandon Wheat King.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he trusted in that program quite a bit.
I think we have to look at it like we have to respect both sides of the argument, right? Like be patient, but also be weary. That Flyers fans have a right to be upset but at the same time, have we really been given the full story on his health, right? Have we been told from day one? There's always been some secrecy behind it, and I respect that. It's the league now, and they don't want to. But I think, was it migraines? Was that the big issue with Patrick that kind of shut everything down?
Yeah, they were saying it was a migraine disorder. That's all we really know beyond that.
Those don't really go away, those holistic methods to help deal with that, but those really don't go away. To manage migraines is a tough one. I don't really see be negative, but if you know someone that's dealt with it, it's kind of
sure.
It's really legit debilitating. Like you can't do anything.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's the scariest part overall, as far from like for us from our standpoint. The one thing I do point out, and that's why like I exercise pretty regularly. People who listen to this podcast probably want me to shut up about it, but I do exercise regularly. I push my body pretty hard. It's really difficult to even get your body to a certain level of stamina. And the one thing I noticed is every one of his shifts, he kept short. 40 seconds max, he's off the ice. 40 seconds max, he's off the ice. And it was very specific. And people could say, oh, it was a bad attitude. I don't think so. I think he was like, I'm gassed at the end of every one of these shifts. And that's kind of what I saw. And at the end of the year, they really had Patrick and Lindblom, who nobody questions Lindblom. And obviously he had his own history of scares with injuries. Sure. But they, like AV was protecting them, clearly. I mean, he put them in the fourth line. He benched both of them in back-to-back games. Like they were doing that on purpose. So in my mind, I was like, to your point, I think there's a little bit of secrecy there as far as like how ready were these guys to play this season and how desperate were the Flyers to play them, because the team, like the way I look at it too is when I see the entire team struggle, like how do I just pick on Nolan Patrick?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like all of the young guys stunk. So I'm like outside of Farabee. So I'm kind of like, okay, yeah. But like, how do you explain TK struggling and then go, oh, but Patrick is done. But I was like, but TK struggled too. And then I go and Sanheim struggled, right? And then Myers struggled. And it's like, I look at it all together and I'm like, I want to see a season first where they're all rolling and Patrick didn't. You know, and then I'll be like, there's a separation.
The thing about the Flyers too is that, I always go back to the 07 and then the 06, 07 and the 07, 08 season where 06, 05, 06 was a decent season, right? It was promising. Yeah. Back from the strike, everyone's happy. So who really cares? Yeah. And then 06, 07 was a disaster. A complete
worst in franchise history. Yeah.
Worst in franchise history, right? And then what happens? They go to conference finals the next year. Right? Right. Yeah. And so that's when you saw Richards and you saw Carter and
they started blossoming. Yep.
Yeah. So you have to, sometimes when you have a bad season, it's like the quote from The Godfather where like they're talking about, the feuds or the war, like, it's good. Gets rid of the bad blood. That you wipe everybody out and then you kind of come back and I'm going to say the Flyers need to change personnel, but I usually, you come to the Flyers went to camp this year off the high of that great season. Yeah, they lost to the Islanders or whatever it was in 7 games. And but we were all happy, right, with what they did in 1920. And then to have that kind of disappointment, it's humility, it's reality. And so, I mean, obviously the onus is on Vino, but I think we'll know by Thanksgiving, right? I think Thanksgiving is always the good barometer, like what the deal is with the Flyers this year. But with Patrick and Konechny, I mean, you would know more than I would because of the whole expansion draft thing. I'm not a big expansion draft guy, like per se, but I can they expose him? Is he protected with?
They can, but the likelihood is very slim. Realistically. I'll just tell you what our internal, again, we have no idea because the list is not out, but we're just guessing. We do know Jake Voracek is going to be exposed. That one's kind of been revealed. So that one's kind of an obvious, but it's going to be all large money. JVR, Ghost, Aube Kubel, Haig, and Braun are the most likely to be exposed. Most likely Patrick is getting protected, similar to what happened with Scott Lawton in the previous one, where everybody wasn't sure who the last guy was going to be, and Lawton wasn't necessarily the guy he is today. And Hextall obviously chose to keep him because he's like former first-round pick. We're not done developing this guy. So I think we're leaning towards that with the Flyers as well. Because at the very least, you could still trade Patrick. He's not making much. Former second overall pick, where the other guys are a lot tougher to move, or they don't bring much back in a trade.
Here's the concern, though. The GM, your ex-GM who drafted him, is in the division.
Yeah, but
how much? How much would it suck for Nolan Patrick to get traded or somehow find his way to Pittsburgh? Yeah, right. And he gets rejuvenated, and in a way, it's a good thing that Crosby and Malkin are but they're like, oh, here's your wing, Sid. And like even a 40-year-old Crosby turns Patrick into
don't even say it, man.
I'm just saying.
No. I mean, that's the fear with Shane Gostisbehere as well, is that I don't know if the amount of good defensemen are gonna be available now, I think makes things really tricky. But if Shane Gostisbehere goes to a team and they throw him on the top power play unit, he led the Flyers defenseman in points this year. So it's like he's not the best defensively, but he has a ton of talent. So you put him in the right situation.
Yeah, I got a question to ask you about Gostisbehere because I don't remember. But like, how did he play in the Islanders series? Was like, what was? And I don't mean to put you on the spot if it was like a tough question, but like with small defensemen, the point was brought up in the podcast I did the other day about Samuel Girard, how he's one of the best young defensemen in the league. Everybody loves him. Oh my God, the Avs got him so cheap, and he was thrown around in that postseason this year, especially against Vegas. So how did he play in that series? Like, can Gostisbehere at his age and his size, is he able to be something beyond just a playmaker and a power play quarterback, or can he withstand? Because like Torrey Krug, for example, was able to withstand the rigors of postseason play, right? He was a Bruin.
Yeah.
But Gostisbehere never really got that vibe the last couple of years. So was he able to Like, does he have hope moving forward to be a guy that you could lean on?
Well, he still gets exposed physically. He has his moments where he doesn't. It honestly, a lot of times from what I noticed, it depends who his partner is. Like even putting him with Samuel Moran this year for a short period of time gave him the confidence to play his game because Samuel Moran's 6'8" and he just kind of throwing guys off of, he takes the pressure off. But if you challenge Gostisbehere physically, that's how you beat him right now. So, and that's the reason he's not able to play, especially in the top pairing role, but in the top 4 right now, especially, like you were saying about our division, brought this up all year round. This is the toughest division in hockey. The Flyers got exposed in it. Shane Gostisbehere gets exposed in this division. It's a physical division. The Islanders play a physical game. So that would be, and so do the Canadians. So, you think about these teams, they know how to get under your skin. And even a guy like Travis Sanheim, he's 6'3", but he's not the most physical guy at 6'3". So he also can get exposed in a physical game. So I would say that is Gostisbehere's downside. But if you put him with a guy, let's just say Colton Parayko, I mean, if you can balance out the pairing that way, I think that there is definitely a role for him as a complementary guy and definitely as a power play guy. So maybe he makes a little too much for that role, but that's really because the cap stagnated. So I think there's still hope for him, but I don't think he's ever going to be that physical guy. But if he's confident, he still moves the puck out of his zone probably as good as anybody. Yeah. So that's his downside. But again, it's one thing that the Flyers fans, and justly so, knock him for is that you get him you get him in his zone and you play physical on him, there's a good chance you're going to beat him or you're going to take the puck from him. So it's a tough position to be in for a defenseman. All right, so let me ask you about some younger guys here. And so we talked about Joel Farabee a bit. I think we said enough about him. Overall, is there something else you want to say? But I think we said enough of him. We're kind of gloating about him. I do want to talk about, let's talk about Isaac Ratcliffe next. He's a guy who I'm still very high on. He's mammoth size. Big players like him usually take longer to begin with, in my opinion, especially, coming in with a scoring touch. He didn't score much. He did have some injury issues in the beginning. He seems to get better in the second half of every season in the AHL so far. But I do think that maybe at the end of his ELC, he'll probably be ready for a pro game. He seems to be maybe of a middle six kind of winger type of player. What do you think about Isaac Ratcliffe?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to compare him to Pat Maroon because everyone seems to be comparing every big winger now to Pat Maroon. Oh, the guy won 3 cups, but it's cliche as much as cliche as it sounds. Like, I don't think the Flyers are going to view Ratcliffe right now as a guy that could challenge for like a top 6 winger spot because it's just really, it's backed up there. But, he's physical. He moves pretty well for his size. So you got a big wing who is deceptively quick, right? He's got hands. He was a big time scorer in the OHL, and he's a good teammate. He sticks up. He fights. So I like those guys, right? I like the throwbacks and playing like you mentioned the injuries. Obviously, when you look at I'll tell you what, maybe like 5 years ago, his AHL stats would be acceptable. But because now we had like kids come in and like you look at what Zayd Wisdom did and even Forrester to a degree and other kids, showed up to the AHL. The AHL was young. It was a young AHL this year because of the relaxed CHL rule. And so I think that you look at how Allison did when he was down there in the AHL. So I think that, not having the eye-popping stats in the minor league level is not the end-all be-all, that you could definitely build off that and say, you know what, I'm going to make adjustments. But the big thing with him is health. He's got to be healthy. And he's like, I like big energy guys. You know what I mean? A big guy who could skate pretty well and hit and fight and score the dirty goals because he's got a touch. That's the thing. He's probably not going to score like off the rush a lot like he did. Did he play for Guelph? I forgot. I think he played for Guelph.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm still high on him. He seems like a good teammate. You know what I mean? He seems like a guy that you'd want to have around, like do anything, whatever's asked of him. Kind of versatile. So, be patient.
Yeah, he seems like the kind of guy that people are going to forget about, and then he's going to come into the NHL and they'll be like, where the heck was this guy? I always find that these big guys are just late bloomers. Like everybody expects because of their size that they're going to be the early bloomers, but I find that typically they have to grow into their body because they're not going to come in and be the guys who score off the rush like they were in juniors. They're going to be the guy who probably gets challenged physically a lot, which is probably why he's getting hurt. It's because they wanted to play more of a power play, grinder type of role. And that's probably why, their body kind of grows in weird ways.
And so the opposition's bigger too. They used to be the biggest guy on the ice, and now they're like just one of the biggest guys on the ice. Yes. So it's a little different.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So next, I want to talk about Jay O'Brien. This is a guy who struggled a little bit after his draft year, but I really liked everything I've seen from him, especially at Dev Camp. He's like he reminds me of Mike Richards actually in a lot of ways, but a better skater. I don't know if he's got the same offensive touch, but he's a fantastic skater. He's not too big, but he's thick, which surprised me about his injury issues. But it looked like he had a really big rebound year. What do you think about Jay O'Brien?
Yeah, well, the decision to go to BU, I mean, he's a Boston area kid, I believe. I think he went to Thayer. And Thayer was Tony
Monty, yep.
Yeah, and then Jeremy Roenick with Thayer guys, but, old school references. But with O'Brien, so he went to Providence, right? He was the Flyers first round pick, goes to Providence, had some injury issues. I think then he left, and then he go to like the BCHL, or he went
Yep.
Okay.
BCHL dominated.
Yeah, now BU had Trevor Zegras, okay, and he's their everything.
And he's
so
amazing.
You're not gonna supplant him. But when Zegras left, BU had a void to fill, and they brought in well, he was already there, but O'Brien was the leading scorer for them this year. Well, so he's this guy who's doing everything. He's playing in the top line, top six, all situations, played center, played wing, and obviously the speed was a big deal. Why he got drafted as high. People were in love with his speed, even though he was like a prepster. He didn't really have any experience against tough competition. And then he was able to validate it. I think this year was his best year since being drafted, right? And that's the most important thing of them all. And I think BU got to the tournament. They went to they either won Hockey East or they had a good year this year, and they went to the NCAA tournament, I think. But they lost, I think they lost to St. Cloud State, the team that went to the final. So just Farabee's a BU guy, so that they have some type of relationship. Also being the both from the Northeast, both drafted in the same year by the same team in the first round. They both BU guys now. Well, Farabee used to be a BU guy, so I like him. I was a little bearish on him for a couple of years, but now after seeing what he did, really good line. He played on a line with the kid Mastro Simone, the Long Island kid that is a Detroit Wings pick. And they had really good chemistry with one another. So maybe there's someone the Flyers should look into, Maestro Simone, because he's kind of blocked over there in Detroit. But yeah, if you're a Flyers fan, like the block is checked in terms of this past season for O'Brien. And he's a center iceman too, so that helps in the depth department.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm still encouraged about him. All right, let's talk about German Rupture. We mentioned him earlier. He has now re-signed with the Flyers. He's coming back for another year. But maybe remind people why he was taken where he was, because I think a lot of people soured on him quickly. Though I will say, everything that I have seen, and I'll tell you, the Flyers very much like him. Like they picked him to have tries with the team over a bunch of other prospects. As a two-way guy, he's got it. He's definitely a playmaker. I don't know if he's like a goal scorer, but he seems like a two-way playmaker type of guy. What do you see from Rubtsov? And, do you still believe in him, I guess, at this point?
I think this was his first full season, but he played in Russia, right? He played in with Sochi, HK Sochi. Was that the team he played for, I believe? Or one of those teams. Yep. And so he was able to, so he was healthy. At least that's what I understood.
Yes, for the most
what you
part,
get with him is a big physical 200-foot center. I mean, and he's a pass first type, like you said. He had number one center roles at the Russian junior level, at the Russian U18 tournament level. Injuries really have defined this guy's career, right? Not the play, not what he's done. It's the injury bug. He can't stay healthy. I think he had concussion issues as well. So you just want him to be healthy. So it's a good sign, much like with O'Brien, and he had dealt with injuries as well, that they were healthy. So this is an example where the shutdown worked, right? That the layoff allowed some of these guys to just heal up, even if it's just mentally. And I'm hoping that Rubtsov isn't down on himself because he's always played like a confident, physical, tough kid, like a leader type. So I hope that, I've been pulling. He was a first rounder for me. I love the pick. I was so happy when he got drafted.
He played very well for Russia, from what I remember.
Oh, he was their number one. I mean, he gave Canada that Canadian U18 team. When I first saw Rubtsov play was the 2015 Holinka that had Nolan Patrick on the top line for Canada in his pre-draft year, draft year, actually almost 3 years before his draft year. And to see those two going head to head, right? Physical big centers, the Western Canadian kid against the Russian kid, it was great to see. And it impacted how I viewed Patrick moving forward and impacted how I viewed Rubtsov. That's why I had him in the first round. I would say be patient, but it's been 5 years. And I think he got a 2-way deal.
Yeah.
This is a situation where the Flyers' depth in the farm system hurts because you'd like to see a guy like Rubtsov be considered like almost like a centerpiece or one of the cornerstone pieces in a rebuild, not a guy that you could just say, oh, we'll see how well you do with 8 million other guys who could play forward or center. And so that's why it wouldn't be the worst case scenario if they trade him. Because I would be happy because you would get a chance. And, so if he could somehow find a way to be a dominant guy at Lehigh Valley this year and just kind of like improve his reputation or reestablish his reputation, because it used to be really high. I think the world of the kid. I'm really happy that they signed him, and good on the Flyers because they're patient with him.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm people know annoyingly, I'm all about patience with a lot of these guys. Like I have a growth mindset. So in my opinion, there's always a road to redemption. But I think you're absolutely right. And this is kind of a knock on the Flyers farm system. There's becoming like this large cluster where there's just too many prospects now. And you got to do something with them. You got to move some of them. It's becoming just a cluster, and you don't know who. Like, when is Jay O'Brien coming over, right? And Jay O'Brien now competes with German Rubtsov, and there's also a bunch of other names already playing down there. And then Wisdom's going to come up, and Forrester's going to come up. It's like at a certain point, it's like who's playing, And at what point are they going to go back to Europe? All right, so let's go into Bobby Brink.
Brink, Denver was a kind of like a rebuilding team this year. They had some notable names. I think they had the Savoy kid over there. The Carter Savoy was one of the recruits they got. Brink, his, I guess, highlight of the season was the World Juniors. Like what he did there, how he had a couple of big moments there, right? Around the net, showing a different side of him. We're used to him being like the perimeter playmaker with the soft hands and goal scoring type, where he was able to be a little more aggressive and get in the dirty areas, and he was on his belly scoring goals or little things like that. I like to see that. But with Denver, he kind of took a step back. Not really his fault because the whole team kind of regressed a little bit, and they were one of the younger teams, right? That program's loaded, but loaded with the last 2 like monster recruiting classes, right? They got really good recruiting classes, so now you have to wait for them. Sometimes that happens with college programs, where you have to wait for them to be seniors or juniors, and not necessarily like Michigan, where they had all freshmen and they were dominant. So he took a step back a little bit statistically. But with Brink, listen, he's a facilitator, he's a playmaker, he's a pure playmaker, one of the purest ones out there in the college ranks. So I expect a huge bounce back season from him. The stats weren't great this year. I think with him, he was a little bit more indecisive with shooting. He's got that bug, I guess, sometimes where he overpasses and you just want him to shoot off the pass. Don't wind it up. Shoot off the pass. Hammer it, take a slap shot or do something where like so many times you see him going down the wing and he'll button hook and like, dude, stop with the button hooks, freaking shoot the puck. Especially when your team is trailing and you need you need like a momentum shift. He's got too much playmaker in him sometimes, and you want to see him. And that's why I was so happy about the World Juniors, where he wasn't being as cute with the puck as he was with Denver. So maybe it was like a wake-up call.
Sorry to cut you off, but to that point, I thought he had a better performance at World Juniors than his numbers kind of dropped when he got back. And I was expecting, for maybe to use some of that momentum, but it looks like he came back and stagnated. And I think you brought up in your podcast that his shooting percentage was like halved from the previous year.
Well, that could be a variety of reasons, but the fact that he was able to do what he did in that big moment, and listen, we're Americans who are happy we beat Canada. And he was a part of that. Just like Kaliev, like how he was able to kind of reinvent himself, the Kings prospect, where he was always knocked for being not lazy, but just on the perimeter, not engaging. And then you saw him engage. And if it took the criticism to get him to do that, I mean, he was a massive difference maker because of the way he played. And the line was, I think, Berard, Brink, and was it Beecher? I forgot who the center was. It was a Farinacci. I forgot what the line was.
I can't remember either.
But that was the momentum changing line. And especially, I think it was the game against the Czechs, where they needed, it was a close game. So, Brink, people thought he was borderline first round caliber in a really deep forward draft. That's why I didn't agree with it to a degree. But I think with him, you're going to see a big turnaround next year. I'm banking on it that he's going to turn it around next year. Have a really good, just dual threat, fancy stat kind of a season with Denver.
I love that, and I kind of anticipate that as well. All right, 2 more players here, and then we'll get close to wrapping it up. But Elliot Dinoye, we mentioned him a little bit earlier, and then Emile Andre.
Okay, so Dinoye, we already talked about it. He was the top line center for Halifax. They were a thin team. Really, he had a wing named Robert Orr. That's his name, Robert Orr. And they had Leroux on the other line. He was their everything. I mean, Leroux was not the guy that really drove that line, in my opinion. It was Orr. I mean, Leroux can do it. He's just so inconsistent. But Orr and Dinoye were the main guys for that team. And I think Dinoye took a massive jump forward with production. He was like a point a game guy, one of the top. Mm-hmm. It wasn't one of the top scorers in the league, I think, but he was one of the main.
Initially, he was. He exploded. Yeah,
and he was good on faceoffs, and they just kind of doing everything. So not a big guy, he's small, and you always have to worry about the Quebec League guys because it's not as physical as the OHL or the WHL. But still, my thing, and I said this on the Flyers podcast, is that every single guy that they picked from the 2020 draft, the 5 picks they had, all 5 guys improved. Like they took the next step. So you had, the big steps from what's his name? Wisdom and Forrester, right? They went from OHL scorers to freaking AHL scorers and good AHL scorers.
Crazy.
And then you had, Connor McLennan had a really good season in the WHL. He improved his production. And then you had Dinoye. And then as far as Andrea goes, listen, not a big guy.
We've talked about him before. But I feel like he is getting completely forgotten about within the Flyers system. And that's why I bring him up to you, because I have a feeling he's much better than people realize. It's just his 5'9" height that kind of makes people kind of throw aside his struggles.
He's basically an Eric Brandstrom clone, maybe not as I don't know. Like I seen both of them play, and they both played for HV71. So you got Brandstrom, and then I guess the line was Brandstrom. They handed it off to Andre, and then he's going to hand it off to a guy named Victor Schulholm, and they're all the same players: 5'9", 5'10", puck moving, on ice general, massive open ice hitters, right? Like freaking Andre's physical. He's a tough guy. And the only reason why his numbers weren't all that great this year was because HV71, as big of as a dumpster fire as they were, they got relegated to the freaking Allsvenskan. That they had one of the best power plays in the league. And the reason why they had one of the best power plays in the league is they had 2 really productive point men who were like older. Martinson, I think the guy's name was, Michelson. But in any event, Andre played like 20 minutes a game. Like he was getting, you talk about a 19-year-old kid playing 20 minutes a game in the SHL. And history says that if you're that young and you have that kind of responsibility, it doesn't matter how bad your team is, that's setting you up for success. Not necessarily stardom in the NHL, but that's going to set you on the right path to get a long look. And the AHL transition shouldn't be as drastic. And with Andre, listen, he's a playmaker. He's a power play quarterback. He's a good skater, like agility, elusiveness wise, strong on his skates, tough to knock off the puck, even though he's small. I love his confidence. And I've used so many examples in the past where he outplayed guys who were supposed to be better than he was. He just has that moxie, that leadership trait, that confidence. So, hey, 5'9", big whoop. Okay. He's a player. And he actually had a better season this year than he did last year.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add this comment on what you said. So it's Martinson, who's 27 years old. He had 37 points this year in 51 games. Also minus 10, not great. And then
Yeah.
the other one was Kinval, and
Yeah.
he's
Johan's Kinval.
yeah,
I think he's in Ottawa. He got signed by Ottawa, I believe.
potentially 23, so relatively
Yeah.
young.
UDFA 97 birthday, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's but he was still he was on the top pairing sometimes.
Well, he was
So
only 18. Just to your point, he's 18 years old, and he's third of defensemen in points. I mean, 7 points in 31 games. So perspective for you, right? Like he's 5 years younger than the next guy, and he's still being used heavily, just like they are, right? So it's obviously he's kind of ahead of the curve.
I bet that kid can't wait to leave Sweden because that season was terrible for HV71 and almost embarrassing. It's almost like imagine like the Flyers getting sent to the AHL. It's kind of like that. HV71 is a big program. They won the title a couple of years ago, and to get relegated, it was crazy. So I'm pretty sure he's either going to be the kind of guy who wants to stay there and help turn it around. But to drop back to the Allsvenskan, I don't think that'll really help his development unless he maintains that role where he's playing 20, 22 minutes a game, and he's like the top guy, because probably those two guys, Martinson and Kinval, they'll probably want to go elsewhere. They probably don't want to be in the Allsvenskan. Yeah, I think that's what happened. If I'm mistaken, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure they got relegated. I'm pretty sure they were the worst team and got pushed down a level. I don't know what Andre's deal is, but you know what? If they could sign him, did they sign him? Did they give him a contract yet or no?
They didn't, but to your point, I could definitely see it happening soon.
Yeah.
He's pretty young. I mean, they have Wiley over here. They have Zamula. So, I mean, it's kind of a cluster right now. Like, we have so many prospects within the AHL program that I think maybe they're a little hesitant to bring him over. But probably because I know they like the Swedish league. They talked the same thing about Yinning. Like, they kind of just like letting Yinning play over there, and he had an improved season. I just think that with the Swedish league, they're a lot more comfortable with that league as far as a development program over like somewhere like the KHL, where they don't really. KHL is not big on developing young players, from what I understand. Like they kind of like if they don't think you're ready, they just won't play you. Like
they'll dress you and they'll sit you, but it's also I think results based. So in those 30 seconds that you play, you better score a goal and have 2 shots and whatever. And then maybe they'll give you a promotion. Right. But the one thing about the Swedish thing, though, and it's a pretty good topic to talk about for maybe dedicating an entire podcast to, is these Swedish defensemen that are coming straight from the SHL to the NHL, they're not doing anything special. So, and we can run down the whole list, right? Dahlin, Broberg, the whole list of the Swedish defensemen in the last 5-6 years that were like top picks. They're really not making any noise in the NHL. They're taking longer to develop. And so I think if that's the case, the Flyers see that maybe you want to get Andre into the AHL, as soon as possible. And it's worked for a guy like, let's say, Rasmus Sandin and to a degree, Tim Liljegren, because, Liljegren's kind of blocked, but I think that you want to see these Swedish kids, get them to the AHL, because the Swedish league, I love it. I love Swedish hockey. I watch a ton of it, but there's a big disparity in the physicality and the speed and the size, the size of the rink, and you name it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I love what you were saying about the AHL, actually, and I do think they need to fix that, because the AHL should be where you're developing young talent, and if that talent is ready at 18, then they should be there. And it's happened throughout. Like even somebody like Nolan Patrick, like he probably should have started in the AHL to some degree, especially coming in from an injury. I mean, he's still, I would argue, too good, but there were cases where guys, were rushed in. Scott Lawton, he was rushed into the NHL as an 18-year-old kind of, right? But he probably shouldn't have been. Like, he was good two-way, but he really should have been playing, in the AHL to begin with, and they kind of didn't. It's like that AHL league should be used more as a development league, and it's not always just because of the rules. I think they also kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe because it's a business as well, that they want to bring in a lot of these older guys. But I think I can tell you right now, Chuck Fletcher is not going by that. We went with a young team last year, and the team's getting even younger. So to your point, I think that trend is happening. All right. So I do want to close the show here, but I do want to get your opinion before we're done this, just on the finals, on Tampa Bay, Montreal. Were you surprised? I mean, I'm not going to say you were surprised with the end result. I mean, I expected Tampa Bay to win the cup to begin with, so I expect that you probably knew that they were somewhat of favorites. But were you surprised with Montreal and how they kind of fought their way to that Stanley Cup final? Did you think they had a chance even when they got there?
Well, I picked them to beat Toronto, and once they beat Toronto, so I said on my podcast, so
Why?
people, Carey Price and the Maple Leafs choke. That's it. That was it. Carey Price, I watched them do that to Pittsburgh. And after seeing Montreal frustrate the Penguins in that play-in round, I'm like, well, if they could do it to them, they could do it to anybody.
Frustrated the Flyers too.
Yeah. And so, because they ended up meeting each other the next round. There was a couple of reasons why, and I wrote about it on the blog about how Tampa and Montreal have a history with one another. Right, that they're in the same division. They've played in the playoffs, I think, 3 times now in the last, I think it's 8 years, right, or 9 years. So there's a history there, a little one. But I knew that if they could get by Toronto, I'm not a big Hellebuck guy. I think he's overrated. I think he's good in he every time I go to even attempt to watch that guy, he just lays a big fat egg in a big game. And so usually teams with bad defenses, but elite Vezina caliber goaltending, that goalie's going to will you to a win. And Hellebuck, Winnipeg was in the freaking conference finals a couple of years ago, and hasn't been very reliable for them. Winnipeg Jet fans would kill me if they hear me say that, but that I'm an objective observer. So the big surprise to me was Vegas, because I felt that if Vegas can get by freaking Colorado, right? If you could get by Colorado, but at the same time, I don't do the whole talk to my phone and tell you what I think thing, the Barstool guy emergency press conference. But I was doing it in the beginning of the playoffs, and I was like, oh, what a surprise! The Vegas shooters gripping their sticks too tight. They had the same problem last year with Demko, and I'm like, look at all those big names on Vegas, and they cannot score. They grip their sticks too tight. And they had so many moments like that in the first and second round, even against Colorado, that opened the door, I think, for Montreal. But overall, it was a fluke. It was a complete fluke for the Canadians. And I'm not disrespecting the franchise, and I was pulling for them, but it was a fluke. I mean, we see that listen, the Canadians went to the conference finals in 2010. It was a fluke. The Carolina in 2002 going to the Cup, fluke. You get Minnesota going to the Cup in 91, fluke. You get these little Cinderella stories. It was a Cinderella run, but Tampa by the time that they and Montreal, I thought hung with them in that series. It wasn't like a blowout after blowout after blowout.
Sure. Yeah, agreed.
But with Montreal, Anaheim in 03, another example. J.S. Aguirre, a bunch of Paul Kariya, and a bunch of gray beards. The promising thing for Habs fans, though, was what the young kids were doing, specifically Caulfield. Suzuki, Kakaniemi. I was happy for the city that they got to experience that, especially at the Maple Leafs expense. Because the Maple Leafs is it's easy to kind of just poke fun at them nowadays.
They don't even take it lightly. They can barely handle it. That city was ready to implode. They want to trade everybody immediately. They're like, we have no talent.
They probably should, though. Can you imagine the Flyers going 5 straight years, losing the first round? Can you imagine the 80s Flyers with all their firepower, right? They had some bad losses in there, right? They had some, but they went to the Cup in 85, went to the Cup in 87. Can you imagine that team, as tough and physical and mean as they were and skilled, that they would lose 5 years in on the first? Everyone is gone.
It was the easiest division. It was the easiest division that they had to deal with too.
How in the world
3-1 lead in the series?
Fans not outside that arena with freaking pitchforks and torches? How are they we'll just give it another shot next year? No, man, you need a revolt, a revolution, clean house. I'm not saying get rid of Matthews, but you got to do something. You have to it's and I say this every year, but that's a different situation. I had a podcast about the Leafs choking. I'm like, I got to talk about it.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to that one.
I feel bad for the fans, because I'm like a closet Leafs fan from the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and
that franchise has had a lot of troubles, at least falling short over the years too. So I think they're skinned for it, and the Flyers have too. I mean, but most teams kind of fall short.
You need one moment. You need one moment, like the Flyers, right? You had 2010. That was the moment, right, where you could say, That was fun, right? It
Yeah,
started
that
from
was great. I
shootout
love
win,
that season.
the shootout win, right, against the
Yeah.
Rangers at
And
my
the
expense.
comeback. Yeah, right.
That was great though. You know, and I'm like Michael Lighton, the waiver wire pickup guy. You know what I'm saying? And every franchise
Began and
needs
ended
that.
with him.
You know, every franchise owes it to their fan base to give them something. Vancouver did it last year, right? They gave them that near conference final run. To do that to your fans, to not give them something like that's why they still talk about '93 like they won the cup. They didn't even freaking get to the freaking Stanley Cup that year.
Yeah.
They lost in Game 7 to Gretzky, and but you talk to people around Toronto, that was their 1975 or their 1994. Like it's like, oh my God,
No, I feel you. But the one thing that I noticed, and I think about this with the Tampa Bay getting swept to the Columbus Blue Jackets, the teams that succeed in the playoffs are the ones that have suffered before they got there. So I do hope that the Leafs young guys can kind of like what happened to the Flyers is like learn from it, like learn from the pain and suffering that you've experienced and generate it into thick skin and become that team that goes from getting swept against Columbus to 2 back-to-back cups and essentially being unstoppable. I mean, there's no team in the league that could stop Tampa Bay this year, in my opinion. I think the Islanders were the closest team to do it just because of the way they play, their coaching, and just the nastiness they bring on the ice. But outside of them, I don't think really Colorado or Vegas, I don't think could have beaten them. They were the second tier behind them. So I think maybe this is the hope for Toronto, is that maybe this is the rock bottom, because they had a 3-1 lead in the series. It's not like they were behind. It's not like they were supposed to just end it and close it out.
You're one hell of an optimist, buddy. I can tell you that much. Because
yes, I am.
They had that big comeback last year against Columbus, right? Remember the comeback win? And so we thought, even though they lost in the first round again, and you're like, but they had that comeback, and I bought into it. I'm like, you know what? They had that comeback. Maybe that'll whatever. And they were so good this year. That's I guess the one thing that they should hang their hat on, is that they were so good this year, that they were resilient. They were winning games in the regular season after like having a losing streak. And, every team goes through that. It looks like the Leafs are going to they're going to go at it again without making any major changes. At least that's what it looks like.
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
And so
they lost Muzzin, they lost Tavares right within that series too. Huge losses for them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but still, but no, I get it. Yeah, you're right.
No, you're right too, though. I mean, you're not wrong.
If they need the stars to align for them to win a playoff round, and they need a little bit of luck, we all know it, right? Every fan base goes through it, where you're like, oh my God, that we came so close to losing that game, but we didn't. I think that the Flyers, it's almost like a situation with the Flyers next year, where that you could kind of say that this isn't rock bottom, but it was a pretty bad year, like all things considered statistically. And that's a proud room. There's a lot of proud guys in that room. They also know that the arena is going to be packed again next year, and those fans are not going to let them get away with it. So maybe they feed off that energy. They realize like, hey, we're going to have a more balanced schedule this year. And I see the Flyers. Now listen, Vigneault, this is what he does, man. I mean, this is what he does. He has these goalie killing seasons, and we'll see. But I just think that expansion draft, free agency, really what doesn't matter, that the Flyers still have a pretty impressive core, and that they have to be a team that teams need to take seriously. It won't be easy, but definitely you want them to get off to a good start. That'll help. I mean, that's the first step in the right direction, because they didn't get off to a good start this year. No, so
even though they won, they didn't play
well. They won, but they were giving up like 4 goals a game. You know what I mean? So
they did not play well. And I'll be honest with you, that loss against the Rangers, I said this before, that 9-0 loss was the worst brand of hockey I've ever seen in the 25 years I've been watching the Flyers.
That was surprising.
It was pathetic. That's rock bottom. Like, that's where I see is rock. It didn't have to be the whole season, but when you see those type of performances, I was shocked that AV survived. To be honest with you. I've seen coaches fired for less. So I'm kind of like, there's got to be something where the GM's going like, all right, we're just starting next next year again. But if like my opinion, it's if I see this again, like now I'm talking about firing coaches. Now I'm talking about making a humongous trade. Though I do think the Flyers are already going to try to make something big. But at a certain point, the coach is just easier to replace. Like that's the problem. That's just the problem. All right, this was an awesome podcast. It took you way longer than I thought.
Fine, had fun.
Yeah, dude, this is great. And again, just a reminder, everybody's listening, check out Steve's podcast. Like you saw what he does here. This is just like him raw. I think each episode is like 2 hours long, right?
Yeah, and then I lost my voice in the process. I had to take a little bit of a break. So,
all right, well, yeah, you got to ease that tension on the voice. But honestly, it's exceptional. And he goes like just like we were doing. He does that by himself about every team. So, and he does some good research ahead of time. So, absolutely make sure to like and subscribe his stuff. It's on Spotify, iTunes, and SoundCloud, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And you have a YouTube channel as well. I forget the name of the YouTube channel though. What
Prospect Film Room. Yeah, doing a day one draft live stream at 8:00 Eastern on the 23rd. I'm not going to stream the draft because I'm not allowed, but it'll be myself, giving you feedback and an analysis for every play. So whoever the Flyers take at 15 or whatever it was at 13, I'll be able to give you guys on the spot analysis, and I'm not going to talk about John Tavares' new home that he bought or like what some of the other networks do. I'll give you raw, unfiltered analysis on your draft pick.
No. Yeah, absolutely nailed it too. And it's very important that we. And again, I'm not trying to pick on any of the podcasts here, like specifically, but it's one thing that before I started this network and this channel with my partner, Jamie, I would listen to a lot of podcasts and I have to like fast forward through the first 20 minutes because it's like they're talking about God knows what. And then they go off on these tangents. And I'm like, I just want to talk about hockey or the Flyers, and then, I don't know if you listen to Steve Dangle's podcast by any chance.
No.
So he, again, they're more comical, but they have a pretty good podcast too. It's all hockey. And then there's the hockey guy on YouTube. I don't know if you know him.
He's the guy with the whiteboard in his closet.
Yeah. I love him. He's legit though. I mean, the guy talks nonstop hockey, and I think this is the stuff that's kind of supplementing, where media is kind of dying a little bit. So. Yeah.
Lesson learned. They got to learn their lesson.
Yeah. Need to bring on a guy like you and pay you money to do what you do, which would be awesome.
I like retirement, man. I like retirement.
Yeah. I feel you, man. All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, like, subscribe, leave any comments. Make sure to check out Steve's podcast website and everything, and follow him in general because obviously your takes are awesome. So thank you again, man. Really appreciate you coming on. Yeah, thank you, Yariv. Always a pleasure, and glad to be on anytime. Yeah, we'll do another one. Maybe we'll wait a little bit till after the draft. Maybe we'll do something in the preseason or whatever. You can come back. Sure, absolutely. Talk about what happened. All right. Again, thank you so much, and remember, always stay gritty.